Emma had never been a fan of cleaning, but when her grandmother passed away, there was little choice. The house was full of old memories, cluttered with things Emma wasn't sure she even wanted to touch. It was in the attic, amidst dusty boxes and faded trunks, that she found it, the old photo album. The cover was worn and weathered, yet it was clearly important to someone. The leather was cracked, but the stitching held strong. With a soft sigh, Emma opened it, her fingers brushing against the yellowed pages. Her grandmother had always talked about her past, but Emma hadn't really listened. Now, as she flipped through the pictures, she found herself pulled into a strange nostalgia, one that wasn't hers. The first few pages were filled with family portraits, most of them unfamiliar faces. But then, something caught her eye. A photo of her mother, young and vibrant, standing in front of a house Emma didn't recognize. She was smiling, but her expression was almost too perfect, too composed. Emma leaned in closer, studying the image more carefully. That was when she noticed it. A figure, just barely visible in the background. At first it seemed like a shadow, but as she focused, it became clearer. The figure was watching her, its eyes dark and intense. Her heart skipped a beat, and a chill ran down her spine. She slammed the album shut. Something wasn't right. Emma sat frozen. The photo album closed tightly in her hands. Her breathing was shallow and the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She didn't want to look again, but her curiosity gnawed at her, urging her to open it once more. Slowly, she flipped the album back open, her eyes immediately drawn to the photo of her mother. It was exactly as she remembered, the vibrant smile, the warm glow of the sun behind her. But now Emma couldn't shake the unease creeping over her. She looked at the house in the background, the one that was unfamiliar, and then her gaze moved to the shadowy figure. She blinked and looked again. The figure was still there, but now it seemed more distinct, its outline sharper, its features clearer. Emma felt her pulse quicken. There was something in those eyes, a darkness, an anger. The longer she stared, the more it felt as though the figure was staring back at her. Her chest tightened. She had to know more. She quickly scanned the other photos in the album, flipping through the pages frantically. There were more pictures of family members, some of them taken at gatherings, others at different locations. But every time Emma looked closer, it was the same feeling. The eyes. They seemed to follow her. With a shiver, Emma slammed the album shut again. She stood up and began pacing the room, trying to calm herself. It had to be her imagination, right? There was no way those pictures were anything more than old memories, relics of the past. But deep down, Emma knew she wasn't convinced. She needed answers, and the only way to get them was to go deeper into the mystery. The unsettling feeling didn't leave Emma as she spent the next few days trying to push the mystery of the photo out of her mind. But the more she tried to ignore it, the stronger it became. Every time she walked past the attic, she felt drawn to the album again, like some invisible force was pulling her back. Finally, she couldn't stand it any longer. She returned to the attic, determined to find out what was going on with that strange figure in the photo. Emma sat down on the dusty floor, the album in front of her once more. She flipped through the pages, scanning the photos carefully. Her fingers trembled as they brushed over the old, brittle pages. "Maybe I missed something," she muttered to herself. She recognized the faces of her relatives, her mother, her father, aunts, uncles, and cousins. But none of the houses in the background looked familiar. The more she looked, the more disorienting it became. None of them seemed to be places she had ever seen. And the figure, always lurking in the background of each photo, grew clearer with each glance. It was unmistakably a person, but its presence was more than just a shadow. Emma's thoughts raced. She needed to ask her family, but she wasn't sure how. What would she say? "I found an old photo album and there's a creepy figure in it staring at me." Her mother had always been a practical, no-nonsense woman. But what if there was something her mother had never told her? Something about the past that had been hidden for a reason? With a deep breath, Emma called her aunt, Mary, who was the closest to her mother. "Hi, Aunt Mary," Emma said, her voice shaky. "I've been going through some old things of Mom's and I found this photo album. I don't recognize some of the places or people in the pictures. Do you know anything about them?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Emma," Mary said softly, "there's something I should have told you a long time ago." Emma's pulse raced as she listened to the silence on the other end of the phone. Her aunt's voice, usually so comforting, sounded distant and hesitant. "What is it, Aunt Mary?" Emma asked, her voice trembling slightly. I didn't want to scare you, but you need to know something about that album. Your mother never told you, did she?" Mary's voice was barely above a whisper. "That album, those photos, are not just pictures. They're—" She paused, and Emma could feel the tension growing between them. "They're cursed, Emma. The people in those pictures, well, they're not all really gone." Emma's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" Mary sighed heavily. "I didn't believe it at first either. But your grandmother, she always said that the photos kept something trapped, something dangerous. If you look too closely, if you focus on the eyes of the people in those pictures, they can reach out, they can—" Emma felt a chill crawl up her spine. She clutched the phone tighter, trying to steady her shaking hands. "They can what?" she whispered. "They can follow you," Mary said, her voice breaking. "They can make you see things, hear things. It's like they pull you into their world." "Is that what's happening to me?" Emma whispered, a wave of dread washing over her. She looked at the album again, sitting in front of her on the floor, its presence now more menacing than ever. "You need to get rid of it," Mary urged. "Burn it. Don't even think about looking at it again. That's the only way to stop it." The line went silent, and Emma's mind raced. It couldn't be true. This was just some wild story, right? But then, she noticed something. The room around her had grown cold, and as she glanced toward the album, she saw the same shadowy figure from the photo flicker in her peripheral vision, as if it were moving, just out of sight. The air felt heavier and Emma's heart pounded in her chest. No, this was no longer just a story. The figure in the photo was real, and it was watching her. Emma couldn't shake the unease that gripped her. Mary's warning echoed in her mind. But it wasn't just the warning that had her in turmoil. It was the feeling of being watched, the creeping sensation that something from those photos had crossed over into her reality. The shadowy figure that seemed to move every time she glanced at it, the same figure that had stared at her from the old album, was no longer confined to the pages. After days of restless nights and increasingly strange occurrences, Emma knew what she had to do. She had to find the house in the photo, the one her mother had stood in front of, the place that seemed so unfamiliar. Perhaps it held the answers, or maybe it was the key to stopping the haunting. Determined, she set out early one morning. The address in the photo was a vague detail, scribbled in a faded ink at the bottom of the page. It didn't look like much, just a name of a street, no zip code, no clear directions. But Emma felt an unshakable pull toward it, as if she were meant to find it. The drive was long, taking her out of the city and into a more desolate rural part of the state. The further she drove, the more isolated it became. The roads seemed narrower, the trees taller, casting long shadows over the car. The world outside her window became quieter, darker, as though she were entering a forgotten part of time. Eventually, she reached a secluded area, the kind of place that seemed lost to history. She parked the car and stepped out into the chill air. In the distance, barely visible behind a thick veil of overgrown trees, was the house, the one from the photo. Her breath caught in her throat as she approached. It was old, weather-beaten, and almost haunting in its stillness. The house looked as though it hadn't been lived in for decades. The windows were cracked and the porch was sagging under years of neglect. Yet it felt as though it had been waiting for her. A sense of déjà vu washed over her, as if she had been here before in another lifetime. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped closer to the front door. She couldn't help but feel that the house itself was watching her. the broken windows like dark, knowing eyes. She reached for the doorknob, and as her hand brushed against it, a cold, sharp sensation shot through her arm. She recoiled, heart racing. But then, she opened the door. The hinges groaned in protest, and Emma stepped inside. The air was thick, stale, and bitter with dust. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she saw the remnants of old furniture, an overturned chair, a broken lamp, a faded rug. But what caught her attention was the large portrait hanging on the wall. It was a family photo, but the faces were unfamiliar. All except one, her mother. Emma felt the world spin. The photo was identical to the one in the album, but now in the flesh it seemed to mock her. She couldn't breathe. It was as if the house had been waiting for her to arrive. And then she saw it, the figure in the background. It wasn't a shadow anymore. It was a man, standing there staring at her. Emma's pulse pounded in her ears as she stood frozen in front of the portrait. The figure in the background wasn't just a shadow anymore. It was a man, his features obscured by a dark, almost ethereal mist. He was standing in the same position as in the photo from her grandmother's album, his eyes locked on hers. But unlike the photo this time, the man's expression was unmistakably clear. His eyes were filled with a cold, intense rage. Emma staggered backward, her breath shallow and fast. She reached for the door to escape, but it slammed shut with a violent force that made the entire house tremble. The walls seemed to close in on her, and the floor creaked ominously beneath her feet. "You shouldn't have come here," a voice whispered. It wasn't her own thoughts. No, the voice came from the portrait itself. The man's eyes flickered, a glint of recognition passing through them. Emma spun around, her eyes wild with panic. The room felt smaller, darker, and the shadows seemed to stretch toward her, like tendrils reaching out to ensnare her. "Who are you?" she managed to croak, her voice barely a whisper. "You already know," the voice replied, deep and gravelly. "Your mother was the one who trapped us here. She couldn't let go, couldn't leave the past behind. And now, neither can you." Emma's mind reeled. Her mother? Trapped? It didn't make sense. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling as she struggled to stay composed. The man's figure in the portrait seemed to shift, his form becoming clearer with each passing second. "Your family. We were cursed the moment that album was created. Your grandmother knew. She tried to protect you, but the curse has only grown stronger. The eyes..." The figure's tone grew darker. "The eyes in those photos are windows. Windows to our world. And now we're all bound by the past. You are the last piece." The words hit Emma like a punch to the gut. The figure was telling the truth. She could feel it. The album, the photos, the figure. Everything was connected, and it was all leading her here, to this house, to this cursed fate. "Why me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Because..." The voice came again, now laced with venom. "You're the one who will complete the cycle. You're the one who will finally take your place in the photo." Suddenly, the air in the room grew thick, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in on her. The temperature dropped sharply, and a cold wind began to howl through the house despite the lack of windows. Emma could feel herself being pulled toward the portrait, as if the house itself was alive, breathing, dragging her closer to the center of its nightmare. Emma's heart hammered in her chest as the air around her grew suffocating, thick with an unnatural chill. The voice from the portrait seemed to surround her, vibrating through the walls, seeping into her very bones. Her limbs felt heavy, as though invisible hands were pulling her toward the portrait, forcing her to face the cursed truth head-on. She tried to step back, but the house seemed to twist, the very floor shifting beneath her feet. The darkness deepened, and the shadows stretched further, growing longer and more tangible. The man in the portrait loomed larger, his face now fully visible, his eyes glowing with an unnatural malevolence. "You belong to us now," the voice sneered, and the man's lips curled into a grin that sent a wave of terror crashing over Emma. "There's no escaping. The cycle has been completed. The moment you looked into our eyes, you were ours." "No," Emma gasped, shaking her head desperately. "I will not become part of this. I will not stay here. I'll fight. Her voice faltered as the room seemed to tighten around her. The walls groaned, the house breathing, alive with the power of the curse. It was as if the house itself was a living entity, feeding off her fear, pulling her into its eternal nightmare. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the photo album. Its weight felt like a stone, a physical reminder of the power it held over her. Her grandmother's warning rang in her mind. Burn it. She had to burn it. She couldn't let the curse claim her. With trembling hands, she opened the album once more. The pages fluttered as though they had a life of their own, each photo turning to reveal the eyes of the people within. The shadows within them seemed to ripple, reaching out, trying to escape. Emma slammed the album shut, holding it tightly against her chest. "I won't let you win," she whispered fiercely, gathering every ounce of courage she had left. The cold winds intensified, but she stood her ground. She darted toward the fireplace where old logs lay in a pile. There was no time to hesitate. She had to destroy it. As she grabbed the matches from the shelf and struck one against the side, the flames flickered briefly before igniting. The fire crackled to life, casting eerie shadows across the room. Emma threw the album into the flames, watching as the edges began to curl and blacken. For a moment, nothing happened. The house was still, the figure in the portrait unmoving. But then the entire room shook violently, as if the house itself were screaming in agony. "No!" The voice from the portrait howled, growing louder and more desperate. "You cannot break the curse. You cannot escape." But it was too late. The flames consumed the album completely, turning the once innocent pages to ash. And as they burned, something shifted in the air. The pressure that had suffocated her lifted, and the oppressive darkness seemed to dissolve, leaving only the crackling sound of the fire. The figure in the portrait screamed one last time, his form beginning to distort, his eyes wild with rage and fear. The house seemed to groan in protest, the shadows receding as the curse lost its hold on Emma. The man's image faded, his presence slowly vanishing from the portrait, until all that was left was a blank canvas. Emma collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, her body trembling from the adrenaline. She had done it. She had broken the cycle. The house, once alive with malevolent energy, was silent now. The door creaked open, as though inviting her to leave. Emma stumbled toward it, taking one last look at the place that had nearly consumed her. As she stepped out into the sunlight, the weight of the curse lifted completely. The air felt warmer, fresher, and for the first time in days she could breathe freely. She had fought and won. The past was finally behind her. Emma stumbled out of the house, the sun feeling almost too bright after the suffocating darkness she had just escaped. The air was fresh, the wind brushing against her face as though the world was welcoming her back. She stood for a moment, breathing deeply, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that still clung to her. But something wasn't right. Her mind kept drifting back to the portrait, the face of the man who had haunted her. And then it hit her. The thought that had been lingering at the back of her mind, something she had refused to consider until now. Her mother's face. Emma had seen it before, not just in the photo from the album, but in her mother's old family pictures as well. Her mother had been standing in front of the same house with the same man in the background. Her mother had known something about this place, about the curse, and yet she had never told Emma. It wasn't just her grandmother trying to protect her. It was her mother too. She had kept the truth hidden, perhaps to shield Emma from the nightmare that had trapped their family for generations. Emma's phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. She looked at the screen. It was a message from Aunt Mary. "I know you're scared, but you freed us. The curse is broken. But remember, Emma, never forget what you saw. The past never truly stays gone. It waits. It watches." Emma stared at the message, her chest tightening. Was it over? Or had she simply delayed the inevitable? She glanced back at the house one last time, a shiver running through her as she turned away and walked toward her car. The past may have been freed, but some things never truly left. Weeks passed, and the nightmares that had haunted Emma's sleep slowly began to fade. She returned to her normal life, or at least what she hoped would be normal. The house where the curse had been rooted now stood silent, abandoned, its dark secrets buried beneath the ashes of the album. The shadowy figure that had once loomed over her family's history seemed to have vanished, leaving no trace of its existence. But even as she moved on, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something lingered, something unresolved. There were moments when she'd be alone. The air around her would grow heavy and she would swear she could hear footsteps behind her, or see a flicker of movement in the corner of her eye. One afternoon while cleaning her house, Emma came across an old, forgotten box in the attic, one she hadn't noticed before. Inside, among old letters and trinkets, was a single photograph. She picked it up with trembling hands, her heart racing. It was a picture of her mother, taken in front of the same house, the same place where everything had started. But this time, Emma's breath caught. Behind her mother, standing in the shadow, was the same man. And this time, his eyes weren't just staring, they were smiling. The chill that ran down Emma's spine was unmistakable. Perhaps the curse had been broken, but it had never truly ended. It had only been waiting. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more chilling tales. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Comment below and let us know what you think of the story. Did it give you the creeps? What did you think of the ending? Your feedback means a lot to us. Stay tuned for more suspense and mystery coming soon.